All right, so we're going to just bring this down. Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining me tonight. So we're back with A Course in Miracles. Have you ever had your computer decide that it needed to update itself right about 5 minutes before you were going to do something important? Yeah, that update took almost 10 minutes, and it's 10 minutes after the hour. So I apologize for my technical difficulty. Also, I didn't get a chance to update all of my stuff to get started with. But anyway, here we are. I appreciate you joining me tonight. We're going to be talking about the textbook. We're going to be talking about this book right here that you should be quite familiar with now, right? And this book is A Course in Miracles, and that's what this channel's been about now for some time. And you know, we're going to continue to study this textbook. We're just getting started, all things considered, and I'm glad to be here. My name is Brother T. If this is your first time here, again, I want to apologize for the way things are working for me at the moment, but that's okay. I'm just trying to figure out. I've got some new software, and I thought I kind of had it together last week, but this week it seems like it's just not going the way I'd like it to, but we'll work through it. Okay, so here I am. I'm trying to get the text up. Here we go. This is the text, and this isn't going to work because I'm way down here in the corner. But that's okay. I'll stay down here in the corner. I don't mind being down here. This is not what I was hoping for, but here we are. So we're talking about Chapter 3. We're in subsection 6, the conflict in the ego. And last week we got through about the first 7 paragraphs. And tonight we're going to start with 45. And 45 is the paragraph that we're going to start with. I don't have the page in front of me. Hold on just a second. Grab my book. Man, when your computer shuts down on you, it really it makes you glad that you're studying A Course in Miracles. No doubt. Okay, so 45. The mind chose to divide itself when it willed to create both its own levels and the ability to perceive, but it could not entirely separate itself from the soul, because it is from the soul that it derives its whole power to create. Let's pause right here and take a good deep breath for just a moment. Imagine that you would be so powerful that you, as a creator, could split your mind. You kind of do that every day, don't you? You kind of fall asleep and you split your mind, a part of your mind, a portion of your mind, just a small segment of your mind. We could call that the sleeping self. It literally is a split of the mind that's not entirely you, is it? In fact, when you're dreaming, when you are sleeping at night and you're dreaming, you're not even aware that you're safe at home in bed. You're not conscious of that. The other thing is that you're experiencing all these different relationships and all these different things that that seem to be normal, but they're not really normal. Man, I'm just not having any luck. I apologize for my computer tonight. I guess I'm just going to have to leave it alone. Yeah, okay. I just want to talk about that for a minute, because when you're sleeping at night, a part of your mind, a portion of your mind has been split off. And it's, this is California back here, the West Coast, Asilomar State Park in Northwest California. So anyway, your mind is split off yet again, and I say yet again because that first paragraph right there, that first sentence says, the mind chose to divide itself when it willed to create both its own levels and the ability to perceive. So could we say that the sleeping self is another level of mind, of the separated idea of self from God, from source? I think so. And we can also say that it's a little crazy because it has no idea where it's at and who it really is, because it's carved away a lot of our life that we've constructed as to who and what we are. Now, I know the essence of who you are is still there, as in personality, as you still know who you are, basically, as a personality self. But we really do forget most of our life, or at least our present life. We forget that we're safe at home in bed. We might forget where we're actually even sleeping, physically located on Gaia, planet Earth. We might not remember much of our current life at all, or we might bring segments of that, pieces of that into the dream. And whatever's going on might be quite dramatic or even terrifying, you know, if we're struggling with lots of fear. I know where we are today, you know, it's May 14th of 2020. And we're in the midst of a pandemic, a global pandemic. At this point, if you're catching this video at some time in the future, you already know, because you can look back and say, okay, this is how that played out. But we don't know, right? We really don't know. We really don't have, a lot of people, I'll say, are not clear at all exactly, you know, where we're going, what we're doing, and how this is going to play out. People that are, you know, well, people that are working in the service industries, the restaurant businesses, and you know, personal care industries, and lots of other of their vendors are starting to be significantly impacted because people are not on the street. We're still kind of in lockdown in our homes, and we're struggling with, and will be struggling. A lot of people are not going to be able to pay for their mortgage. This is, you know, we're right in the middle of May now, and some of our states are starting to open up, and some are not. And there's parks and places that have been closed down, swimming pools and beaches, even though this virus couldn't exist in any of those places because of the temperatures or the salt water or the chlorine in a swimming pool, things like that. You know, the things that have been given up, the freedoms that have been given up, at least in our culture, is overwhelming. And a lot of people are starting to wake up and realizing that their freedoms have been overrun. You know, that the people have taken power that had no authority to take power. And we could get into a long conversation about that. Maybe we could, maybe we should. But that's not the purpose of our conversation tonight. The purpose of our conversation tonight is, how does all this play out in A Course in Miracles? In A Course in Miracles, what we begin to recognize is that, as Jesus tells us here, he says, you're always in a state of dreaming. When you chose to split the mind, you chose. You and I chose to split the mind. And when we chose to split the mind, we separated ourselves from the knowing self, and we stepped into a mind of perception, a perceiving mind, if you will. And that's what the little sleeping self is, another split, if you will, temporary though it may be. Every time we drift off into sleep, it is an analogy, a metaphor, or a beautiful example of what's really going on all the time right now, if you will. In this awakened state of consciousness, we are split off from our true self. We're split off from really knowing where we are. Like the sleeping self is not aware that we're safe at home in bed. Maybe this self is not aware that you're safe at home in heaven. Heaven being the mind of God. Heaven being the only place you could be, because you're an idea in the mind of God, as Jesus tells us in this textbook. So the mind does become split because we chose it. It didn't happen to us. We're not victims. And neither did coronavirus. It didn't happen to us. We set it in motion. The whole world that we're experiencing is our creation, because we're creators. We are the energy of the Creator in action. And collectively, universal consciousness that we are holding as a human race, if you will, on this planet, is manifesting experiences that are consistent with what we desire, what we would like to experience, and the vibration of consciousness that we're holding. And that's the good news, because that is, if we change and shift our consciousness, if we change and shift if we become self-realized, if we begin to understand what real is, and then begin to connect in union and relationship with our higher self, which we're going to call it the Holy Spirit in A Course in Miracles, which is nothing more than your right mind. It is you. It is your true self that's not asleep, never fell asleep. Just like right now, you can remember the dreams you had, or maybe some at least. As soon as you wake up, you were there, but you see that sleeping self is not all that you are. It's not even what you are. It was a fantasy of you having a life that didn't really exist at all. Maybe is it possible that we're experiencing that right now? Let's read on and find out. Perception always involves some misuse of will because, I got to go to 45. I jumped in on 44. The mind chose to divide itself when it willed to create both its own levels and the ability to perceive. But it could not entirely separate itself from the soul, because it is from the soul that it derives its whole power to create. Even in miscreation, will is affirming its source, or it would merely cease to be. This is impossible. Thank goodness, right? This is impossible for you to cease to be. You didn't create yourself, and you cannot really harm yourself or destroy yourself or kill yourself or any of that. Now, you're not the body. You are as God created you to be. And as we continue to read and study, we begin to realize that we are way more than what the body would try to argue with us, or the ego mind would argue with us that we are this physical thing. So I'm going to go back here and bring back in the textbook so you can read along with me here. So if I can get this to work. The mind chose to divide itself when it willed to create both its own levels and the ability to perceive. Even in miscreation, will is affirming its source, or it would merely cease to be. This is impossible because it is part of the soul which God created and which is therefore eternal. So if we could look at the soul kind of like the awakened self, this self, as compared to the sleeping self, the dreaming self at night, if we could kind of look at the dreaming self at night as this self, then we could see the soul then as the self that's not asleep. That part of you that knows where it is, what its existence is about, and is busy creating and extending God, the source of all that is being extended through you as a soul. Paragraph 46. The ability to perceive made the body possible because you must perceive something, and with something, you must perceive something and with something. So you made the body, you and I, at a level of mind, just like the ego, the sleeping self doesn't know where it's at. It doesn't know where you're sleeping, what town you're sleeping. You may, again, incorporate some of that experience into your dreaming state of mind. But have you ever noticed that you never lay down and go to sleep? The sleeping self never lays down and goes to sleep anywhere. It's just living a drama, living its life. So it can't imagine this self that's hearing my voice right now, that's following along on this YouTube channel. That sleeping self can't imagine all that this self is and what this self is basically up to, so to speak, the life that you're living now. Bits and pieces might filter in, but it manifests pretty much whatever it wants to based on its unconscious programming. And so that's what the Course in Miracles is about. It's a course of mind training. We're beginning to work through our unconscious programming and reprogram that mind to free ourselves of the false perceptions that we're experiencing here in this physical world. This is why, okay, so something, you must perceive something with something, and that would be the human self, the human body. This is why perception involves an exchange of, or a translation, which knowledge does not need. Knowledge needs no translation. Knowledge is. Perception is a perception. It's an opinion. It's a positionality. It's a construct that's made up of imagination, if you will. The interpretive function of perception, actually a distorted form of creation, then permits man to interpret the body as himself, which though depressing, was an attempt to escape from the conflict he had induced. The superconscious, which we've already come to understand now, the revelation comes from the superconscious, right? It's an impulse that comes from the superconscious. The superconscious, which knows, we could say that would be the awakened self, the mind, the soul, if you will, which knows could not be reconciled with the loss of power because it is incapable of darkness. This is why it became almost inaccessible to the mind and entirely inaccessible to the body. So the superconscious is completely inaccessible to, let's just say, the brain of the body, if we looked at it from that perspective. But it's almost entirely inaccessible to the mind. But you are mind, and you are much, much more than just the mind, the brain and the body itself. Thereafter, okay, after the separation, the superconscious was perceived as a threat. It's a threat to the ego for sure. Because light does abolish darkness merely by establishing the fact that it is not there. Darkness doesn't exist. And no, I'm not actually in a dark room right now, though it kind of looks like that on the on the screen that I'm projecting tonight. I'll have this worked out by next week, I promise you. Yeah, I'm not in darkness at all. It's actually kind of bright where I'm at right now. But the mind, the ego mind, perceives it lives in darkness, and the not knowing self, if you will, believes it lives in darkness. But it's not really there. The truth will always overcome error in this sense. This is not an active process of destruction at all. The light just dispels the illusion of darkness, we could say, right? I'm adding that, as you can see if you're reading along. We have already emphasized that knowledge does not do anything. You know, we really beseech, we do a lot of beseeching. We do lots of beseeching. And let's talk here for a minute. We do lots of beseeching, or at least I did in my earlier life. kind of did a lot of beseeching. I think one of my first experiences of attempting to pray was when I was quite young. I'm going to say maybe, maybe around the third grade, somewhere around there, maybe 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old. And we had moved into a new neighborhood. And before that, we kind of lived back off of a main, not what a main street, but a fairly busy 2-lane road going out of town in a little rural town in Tennessee. And we called it the sinkhole because in the front of our property, which was at least a good acre or more, it was this huge sinkhole. And it just went down, probably, 40, 50 feet down into the bottom of it. And we never, we were told, don't even go down there. I'm pretty sure I explored it a little bit, but never really found anything to be too frightened of. I don't think there was a cave there or anything like that. But anyway, that was our front yard. And the driveway kind of wound around to get back to where we were. Some of my fondest memories there is my dad brought home some baby ducks one time, and then it wasn't long before those ducks were just following me around everywhere I would go. I was one of the older children in the group, and also I had this great little dog, and I just loved my dog, right? And anyway, we ended up moving from there. And we moved kind of across the street, down the street, across the street into a small subdivision. And so got up one morning and my dog was gone. And my mother was afraid of dogs, so he never came in, but he was, fed him outside. He always hung around. He didn't go. He never went anywhere. Anyway, he was gone, right? And he didn't come back after another day and then another day. And I remember sitting in a lawn chair out on the yard one afternoon